Was that thing ever typed out?
All right, so I've started the sign-in sheet. We left off, we didn't get to TDTG communicators and their answer to the question, the critical thinking challenge. What is justice and what does it have to do with marketing? So what did you guys say was justice and what it had to do with marketing? And one of the things I have noticed is that you guys need to project a little bit more. When I was in the lecture hall, I would actually give students microphones so that it would be picked up by the recording. It's a little bit light, so if you would make sure that you speak from your diaphragm and project, that would be helpful for recording purposes. So that when you're on YouTube and your voice recognition and facial recognition need to be picked up by the mafia. They've got all the data that they need. Go ahead.
Justice is punishment for wrongdoings and appealings to audience morally correct. It is important to marketing as illustrated by the wrongdoing or bribery, economic espionage, and the right of consumers. Justice in marketing is highlighted by the wrongdoing of bribery. It is unethical to try to drive consumers away from the brand that they are currently involved with. For example, a company should not go into its competitors' business and advertise to their already established customers. You will not find a Chick-fil-A employee at a McDonald's store handing out free chicken sandwich coupons because it is an unethical way to advertise. Justice in marketing is highlighted by misconduct of economic espionage. Stealing a competitor's idea is wrong. Although it is not against the law, everyone knows it is morally wrong. For example, it would be morally wrong for an employee of one company to take that company's idea and issue a statement to another company to use as it was his original idea. Justice in marketing is highlighted by the right of consumers with moral in mind. When companies advertise a product, they direct it towards the well-being of their consumers they are trying to reach. For example, Johnson & Johnson tend to have advertisements that target for new moms and families that center around the world and empowering women because they know that will help attract consumers. In conclusion, companies should be benefit their consumers and society by following justice in marketing. Although companies don't always follow morally correct guidelines when marketing, they should try to have relevant credibility.
Okay, all right, so I like your examples. Bribery, what's the difference between, to start with, what's the difference between bribery and persuasion? What? Okay. So, providing somebody with samples is bribery. Kind of. That's one of the biggest ways we get people to try new products, isn't it? Is through sampling, giving them a sample of
You
it.
don't expect anything in return to give them a sample. You're bribing, you're giving them something in hopes for something else.
Oh, so in order for it to be bribery, there has to be a quid pro quo. You're giving them the sample, and you hope that they'll try it, but it's not, I'm going to give you the sample in exchange for you switching your brand loyalty necessarily. Okay. Okay. All right. Economic espionage. One of the things I think you said, I thought I heard you say, is that it's not necessarily illegal, but it is immoral. It is actually illegal. There are actual statutes that regard economic, depending on how you engage in the espionage, right? If you go and you break into computers and things like that, that is clearly illegal. And that's one of the ways that they do get secrets from corporations is they go in and they hack. For example, China is now the world's biggest what we call pirate nation, and they actually will go in and they'll hack things. And so it is actually a crime, which I think brings up an interesting point, that is the law an acceptable moral minimum? And a lot of people say that it is, and I think I said this last time, what if the law itself is immoral? It's not that the law is unimportant, but the law itself may be immoral. So I think that's important to remember. And then I like that you talked about consumer rights. I think that's important. We have recognized that we have moved in this era from the doctrine at common law, which was caveat emptor, to strict products liability. So caveat emptor said, let the buyer beware. And that worked okay as long as people were really able to evaluate the products that they were buying. And in the past, I think we could do that. In Oklahoma, when we were founded, Oklahoma as a state was sort of founded in two parts. The first part was Indian Territory, right? The second part, which was open to quote-unquote white settlement, occurred after the Civil War, largely in result of the fact that the 5 civilized tribes, who all knows what the 5, for those of you who have had Oklahoma history, what are the 5 civilized tribes? Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, right? Yeah, there's 4 C's and an S. Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole are the 5 civilized tribes. What side did they side with in the Civil War? Some of the tribes. They sided with the South because they had slaves. So they opened Oklahoma. They took away the unassigned lands from the tribes, opened it to white settlement through the land run beginning on April 22nd, 1889. My hometown of Guthrie was the land office, and that was so it went to being a town overnight in one day with the land run. And so at that point in time, my point of this is that people could really evaluate the goods and products that they bought and purchased. You could tell whether or not you were purchasing, an axe that was serviceable for the use to which you were going to put it. And so we have this idea of caveat emptor. Can you evaluate the goods that you use? How many of you have gone to the doctor in the last year? How many of you have taken a prescription in the last year as a result of that? Could you evaluate that, the safety of that drug? Probably not, which is one of the reasons why we have all of these advertisements for lawyers, 1-800-BAD-DRUG. If you've been hurt, if you've taken the pain, prescription Vioxx or whatever, please call the Hurt Line and Dan Davis, and we'll solve your problem. So we've moved from caveat emptor to the idea of strict products liability. Strategic diversity, where are you guys? All right, let me make sure I get this focused on you.
Yeah, so I guess the good thing about being last is everybody's already covered what we've almost talked about. So
You're not last. There's still a few teams to go. Go ahead.
We touched base on Chick-fil-A beliefs.
Okay.
That a lot of people have, and how that they're uncommon, but it's what they believe in. So it's kind of like their justice and their beliefs. The things you see at Chick-fil-A are obviously different than like McDonald's, and that's what they believe in. That's kind of what their code of morals is. So that's what they go with. And one thing.
So what do they base that on?
It's the founder. That's what it is.
Why does he have this? Why is it that they're not open on Sunday?
Position.
Okay.
So and we went ahead and touched on fairness of the company and
Okay.
how that's justice. How like if you have a product that's been advertised and they say like 100% money guaranteed, if you don't like it, just return it. And that's fair. That if they do not like it, that they sound off what they said and accept it back. You want that too. So that's a part of justice too in marketing. And as far as customer satisfaction, it goes with fairness. And if they don't like it, they can return it. Another thing is a company's honesty, and we related that back to the cigarettes. Now that they tried to like say the cigarettes were good for you, and then it's just a casual pastime, that that's an honest thing. That's obviously unjust to lie to customers and say, look, smoking their product is going to benefit you or not going to hurt you at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that. Did anybody not know at that point in time?
I don't
I
really
mean,
know.
you would have had to have been from another planet.
Yeah.
You know, at the time that they start this, the Surgeon General comes out with this warning, I think in the 1940s, that says smoking is hazardous to your health and it may lead to lung cancer. And that's the point at which the cigarette companies really start to worry about this, right? Does anybody not know? By the time that they were doing this in the 1980s, which I think, thank you for not smoking, was largely supposed to take place in the late 80s and early 90s, if I recall correctly from the movie, which this really did happen. Like everybody knew.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's an exception of like old timers that smoked before that they started making cigarettes that actually was just tobacco leaves instead of when they started to put in all kinds of other terrible chemicals. But other than that, yeah, I think pretty much everybody believes.
I think everybody had. So so they were lying. But it's sort of like Donald Trump. You know he's lying. So, I mean, like, you just sort of accept it, right? I mean, like, the news relishes pointing out that he's lied. And it's like, but people knew that when they elected him. I mean, they knew this. We didn't elect a pope to be president. And so the news teams, particularly the liberal media, relish pointing out he's lied again. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I use what's called the rule of tall. I'm a lawyer. So, when I cross-examine witnesses, I use this rule. The rule of tall is they all lie. If their mouth is moving, they are lying. And I applied that to my clients as well. Like they were generally lying to me. I'll never forget. I got court appointed to this one case where I went down. I saw my client in the jail, and I said, "Did you confess?" Because there was no real evidence against him. Nope. Did you talk to the police? Nope. Did you sign a confession? No. Sure. Absolutely. Didn't sign a confession. We get to court, and I said, "Your Honor, I think we should release my client on his own recognizance. There's no evidence against him." And the district attorney says, "Your Honor, we have a confession," and hands me this, and I look at it, and at the top of it, it says statement. And I go over to my client, and I'm like, "I thought you didn't sign a confession." That there's a statement. The statement was, "I did it." Like, yeah, so they all lie. All right. All right. Let's see. Smith, where are you guys?
Right. We kind of approach justice more as like the legal baseline kind of, if you break a law, justice is the, how do I say that? The penalties put against you is considered justice. So we kind of went at it as like governments and society kind of determine the baseline of ethical behavior with justice. Okay. So
I think you're at the desserts theory as well.
kind of, yeah. And so, in other words, justice is the guidelines businesses have to follow to kind of avoid legal trouble, whereas ethics is the above and beyond that. It's what you determine as a company to, follow in your own path, while still observing the laws. We also kind of went about why it's important for marketing, and that's just so that it kind of prevents companies from just flat out lying to us, again, customer rights, consumer rights. Prevents them from just lying to us and saying, oh well. And that's kind of where that justice falls into marketing. You kind of have to, there's a baseline you've got to follow. If you don't, you run afoul of the law.
I think one of the things that goes along with what you're saying is this idea, and we talked about it a little bit last time, this idea of customer lifetime value. And we talked about this when we talked about the sales error. If you're just worried about this sale and not the next, then you don't really have to worry. But the simple fact of the matter is most businesses have to rely on repeat customers. And so it's this idea of good faith and fair dealing. And underlying, by the way, the UCC is always a covenant of good faith and fair dealing. in every transaction that a business has with you. And so I think you're right. Yeah, there's sort of this baseline, but businesses would do well to go beyond that baseline because fundamentally people don't want to do business with people that they think cheat them. One of the reasons that Walmart was so overwhelmingly successful was that they would take stuff back when other companies wouldn't for years and years and years. They were the first one to have an unconditional return policy. And so I think that really was one of the things that set them apart and allowed them to distinguish themselves from the competition. All right, the determinators. Where are you? Hold on 1 second. Let me just make sure I get the camera. All right, so you might want to just stand up because you're like being blocked by the other 3 rows. There you go.
All right, we got justice is what is right and fair in companies' business practices and punishment when they are not.
Okay, so we got fairness and desserts, okay?
It is important to marketing as illustrated. It is important to marketing as illustrated by warning labels, disclaimers, and being sensitive to your audience, and through regulation when they don't. Justice in marketing is highlighted by warning labels because it is unethical to sell someone something that will cause them harm without first letting them know. It is also highlighted by being sensitive to your audience because you shouldn't market inappropriate things to people that shouldn't see those types of things. It is also highlighted by disclaimers because, for example, alcohol companies say to drink responsibly. And there's lots of examples of companies that don't do proper warnings and disclaimers, and then the government comes in and regulates them heavily. Like I was going to say with cigarette companies, they misled everyone, and now there's enormous taxes on cigarettes, and in some countries they put pictures of what will happen to you if you smoke them. And then there was an example recently of London Bombay Gin. They advertised their liquor to be 44% alcohol, and it was actually 77% because they were distilling error. And they lost the whole batch. It all got recalled, and they lost tons of profit. And then for Hurricane Irma, Delta Airlines saw that they were getting lots of ticket traffic with people trying to evacuate. So they took the ticket prices from $55 to $3,000 to get out of Miami. And JetBlue Airlines saw that, and they swooped in, and they set all of the ticket prices out of Miami at $100. So since they were more fair and honest, they're going to get way more business than Delta Airlines.
Okay, so with regard to warning labels, let me ask you this. How much do we have a duty to warn?
I think there is a strong duty to, it's not as much like a moral obligation, but a financial one, because it'll really come back at some of
One of the things that I'm sort of fascinated by is like, shouldn't people just recognize, like, don't do that? So for example, when these chairs all came in, they all had a warning label. Let me see one of these chairs here. They all had a warning label that had a circle with a red bar through it with a guy, you know, a little stick man doing this. Do you really need, I'm thinking that if you need a warning label to tell you that this is not a step stool, like you're a candidate for natural deselection. Right? Like, do we really need a warning label for that?
I think you should always assume your audience is going to do this.
Oh, okay. Assume everybody's an idiot. And then warn appropriately.
Prepare for the worst case.
Prepare for the worst case. What about this case? In the 1970s, there was a drug that was marketed called diethylstilbestrol. You all don't know what this is. DES for short. Diethylstilbestrol. There are, most people, I don't want children, never wanted children. They make me nervous, right? Most people want kids though. And there are certain types of fertility problems that can occur. I mean, there are various ones. One of them is that you just can't get pregnant. If you are a female, you just can't get pregnant. Then there are people that can get pregnant, but they spontaneously abort, which is what is common in the common vernacular is referred to as miscarriage. Diethylstilbestrol was marketed as a drug that would allow a woman who had this issue with spontaneous abortion to carry a fetus to term so that it would actually be born. And this was a miracle drug for a lot of people, for a lot of women who had gone through multiple miscarriages. This was a really big deal. Years later, the offspring of those women, if they were female, ended up with rare forms of cancer that oftentimes proved fatal. Did the drug manufacturers have a liability to those children? Should they have warned that? That like your female offspring, a limited number of them, might become prone to certain types of cancer as a result of their mothers having taken diethylstilbestrol. The drug manufacturers, when you test, they didn't know at the time. Was it reasonably foreseeable that 20 years after somebody took a drug, that the children, the offspring, it didn't happen, by the way, to male offspring. It only happened to female offspring. How reasonably foreseeable? By the way, the company was held liable for that under a theory of strict products liability. How foreseeable is that?
Product is like selling a life. If you're going to give someone a life, then I think you should be responsible for that life.
Okay. All right. But how foreseeable? I mean, the drug company said we tested it. It didn't cause cancer in the women. And who would have seen that it was going to cause cancer 20 years down the road? That there would have been a cancer. At what point can we say that the duty to warn is extinguished based on reasonably foreseeable? So there's a case out there called Fallscraft, the Fallscraft case. Versus, I think, Long Island Railroad. And what this case involves is this idea of reasonably foreseeable, reasonable foreseeability. Mrs. Fallscraft is standing on his train platform waiting for a train to come when a man rushes through the railroad station to try and catch a train that's leaving, and he jumps on this train that's pulling out of the railroad station. And he's starting to fall back. He's carrying this package, and this porter from the railroad company gives him a little shove to get him on the train, and he drops the package that he's carrying, which happens to be explosives. The reverberation, the shock waves from the explosion, causes a set of scales that are hanging on the wall at the other end of the platform to fall and hit Mrs. Fallscraft in the head. And of course, who does she sue? She sues the railroad company because they're the ones that their porter gave the guy a little shove to get him. And she says, but for the fact that you shoved this person, I wouldn't have been injured. Because he may not have dropped the packages on the railroad, causing an explosion in the scales. And the court says, yeah, that's right, but for that fact, you might not have been injured. But that wasn't reasonably foreseeable. That's too attenuated. Did the porter really think when he pushed the guy, like, oh, he's going to drop a package and it's going to explode? How many people could predict that kind of thing, right? So I think there has to be some maybe temporal aspect to it. Although with the law there doesn't, which is another example of how maybe the law and ethics are different. Because with strict products liability, you're just strictly liable, whether or not it's reasonably foreseeable or not. The chameleon.
Okay.
Hold on just one second. There's the camera. The mob is really going to be able to see you.
Yeah, I know. Totally clear. Okay, so our definition, what is justice? We said justice is the practice of instilling fairness and equality based on morals, ethics, and laws. One of
So
our
we have another
examples was IHOP and National Pancake Day. It not only supports local children hospitals, but also brings in customers and profits that they wouldn't have otherwise if they did that day. Mostly we just said the same thing everybody else has been saying, that justice and marketing is important to keep ensure transparent relationship between the public and any organization, allowing every consumer to participate in full disclosure, builds loyal customer relationships in which a company and their long-term goals.
Okay, so you recognize CLV, customer lifetime value. I think that's an important thing, the customer lifetime value and the long-term strategic goals of the company. So let me ask you about, you used IHOP as an example. Why'd you choose IHOP?
I chose IHOP.
You chose IHOP.
And it's just because I've worked those days.
Okay.
I've done the asking people to donate. So I've many of hours asking people I just gave you free pancakes. Now do you want to donate to our local hospitals that save our children's lives?
Of course, isn't IHOP maybe one of the reasons that we have so many local hospitals? I mean, aren't they maybe? So when I was talking about the Fallscraft case a minute ago, what the court says is there's cause in fact and there's proximate cause, which is legal causation, which is this idea that it's too attenuated. Isn't IHOP really the proximate cause of a lot of people having heart attacks?
No, it's their choice to eat it. Are the children's hospitals filled with kids that are having issues because of IHOP?
Interestingly enough, we are now seeing an increase, the number of preteen individuals who are being diagnosed with severe coronary artery disease has increased. That was never a thing. Nobody 50 years ago ever who was under about the age of 55 ever had coronary artery problems. We're now seeing children with severe coronary issues as a result of. So isn't IHOP the one of the proximate causes? Them and McDonald's.
If they're eating it that much, I guess.
Okay.
They're healthy options. Yeah, I mean,
All right.
you don't have to eat there every day.
I'm just thinking,
You don't have to eat
the
McDonald's all the
the
time.
disconnection there between sort of,
But
you
they
know.
also are helping with cancers and,
Okay.
non-diabetic type issues.
All right. They serve lots of processed meat, don't they? Like bacon, sausage. What's one of the number one causes of gastrointestinal cancer? Consumption of highly processed foods. It's just an interesting dichotomy there that I see between IHOP and their support. All right, we've got 100. Okay.
We talked about justice as the quality of being fair and reasonable, and some of the points was honesty, fairness, and trust. So with the first one being honesty, we talked about how companies sometimes lying will cause a bad reputation or will draw customers away. For example, when people buy products that are labeled like all natural or healthy, they don't want to find out that it was a terrible chemical or substance put into it, like vegetarian, like they find meat in their patty instead of black beans. They might be upset. For fairness, we talked about Nike products. They just recently started selling bigger size clothing, and we wanted to talk about how that was more fair for them to branch out, and for people who are working out at a bigger size, for them to have Nike as well.
Okay.
And then with trust, we talked about Apple and how their customers are expected, when they have a defect in their product, they can return the product and hopefully it'll be fixed. I'm not sure how Apple works because I have a Galaxy, but
Let me ask you with the trust issue in Apple, one of the things that Apple said, so there was this little terrorist incident that we had happen. Where was this? In California, in a town called, anybody remember? San Bernardino. And the terrorists in that instance had Apple products. And the FBI went in and said, we want you to do what? We want you to give us the ability to unlock it so that we can use it in our investigation. And what did Apple say? They said what? Yeah, they said no. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do it. Should they have done it?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
How do you? So this is an issue with trust. I think their argument was, if we do this, our customers are not going to trust us to not give their information to the government, just willy-nilly, just to hand it out, like it's candied mints. And this is a huge issue.
No, it was more the fact that they were getting a tool that Apple now had no control over. So in other words, it's like giving somebody a key to open every lock. You can give it to them, but there's no stipulation that they have to give you back the key.
Right.
They're not going to make a copy of it.
And that was what Apple said, that people won't trust us if we do this, right? I mean, it was a trust issue. On the other hand, you have a lot of people who are law and order types that say, I'm not going to trust a company that won't cooperate with the government. What do you do in that situation? You have a lot of people that would say, I won't do business with a company. I mean, like, there are a lot of people, when I used to teach criminal law and procedure, for example, a lot of my students would say things like, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Sounds like a call.
They were all police officers. If you are not guilty, why are you running? I don't know. So what do you do in those? What do you do where you have these conflicts in trust?
But at the same time, wouldn't Apple be sending out another message of, you can do whatever you want with our products and like get away with it because we're not going to turn you in, kind of a thing? Could they be condoning the, breaking the law kind of thing as well?
I guess my response to that would be, it's a tool. If we're going to accept that argument, then we would have to start limiting guns, right? We'd have to start saying there's only one purpose for a handgun. And I say this as somebody who's, got a concealed carry permit. There's only one purpose for a handgun. What is that purpose? It's to kill another human being. So are the gun manufacturers liable for crime? I don't know.
Depends on the judge.
We generally have a tendency to like guns. All right, so you all had some really good responses. I think. All right, so we had a really good discussion. I think you can see that this is one of those things that's a very abstract idea that's hard to pin down exactly what the absolute definition of justice is. A lot of people have a lot of different things. We think we know what we're talking about, and one of the reasons that this is important is that when we talk about what it is that we can know in terms of how people feel or what they like, it becomes less than trivial and maybe harder than we think it is to think about these things. So why should we study philosophy in marketing? Well, what's the highest degree you can earn on a college campus? Well, it's the PhD. And so if you get a degree, if you get a doctorate in marketing, they don't call you a, DMS, which would I guess be like Doctor of Marketing Science. You get a PhD, which is, some people would say stands for piled higher and deeper. But why is it that you get the PhD degree? What does PhD stand for? Doctor of Philosophy, right? So philosophy is the highest degree that you get, and the reason that you get the reason the highest degree is the Doctor of Philosophy is because it's an activity that focuses on the acquisition of knowledge and what it is we can know and how we can know it. So there are three great questions that philosophy tries to answer, and they are fundamentally important to all academic disciplines, and certainly they're important to marketing. And the answer that we get to these three questions is going to help us really think, when we think about these questions deeply, are going to help us come up with better ways of doing things, right? So the three great questions are the question of knowledge. What is it I can know and how can I know it? This is broken into two subcategories of philosophy. So there are fields within the discipline of philosophy, and they're called epistemology and metaphysics. So epistemology deals with what is it that I can really, really know, and metaphysics deals with the study of reality. What is it that's real? What is it that exists? So epistemology, how can I know something? What is it that I can know? It turns out that this is more difficult than we might think. What is this here?
Table.
Really? Why is it a table?
Use it to put stuff on.
Okay. Is this a table then? I put stuff on it. I just put my phone on this, so it's a table, right?
No.
Built with a purpose.
Depends on the one. Like the reason. Purpose of the material.
Okay. So the use to which I put it.
Yeah.
Step back, roll back for a second. Move over there. So what is it now?
Sure.
He just said it's the purpose to which I put it. I'm using it as a chair. So is it a chair? I'm still not sure it's a table. Why is it a table? I don't think it's a table. I don't think this is a table. I think it's a desk. It's a desk, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're going to give up that easily? You're not going to be much of a philosopher here.
No, I just plan on making philosophy.
Huh?
A desk is a form of
A desk is a form of
a table.
a table? Type of table. Okay. Are you sure about that? So all desks are tables, but not all tables are desks?
Yes. So maybe table would be an umbrella term for.
So table is broader than desk. A what?
A generic name for all kind of stuff like that. Desks, stands, or.
Well, we're not going to get very far if we can't even, if we're using generic thing. I mean, like, we got to come to, like, what is this that's there in front of you? You can see this is difficult. If we can't even agree on what this is, I don't think this is a table, and I'll tell you why I don't think it's a table. Because I think table is something that you eat at. And you're using this to write on.
Well, something that you eat at is a dinner table.
There are two more than dedicated.
We
What?
eat all this?
We call
Technically, I got pretzels.
So for you, it's a table.
I guess. It could be a table, it could be a desk.
You apparently ignored the signs that say no food in the classroom. I don't care about those signs.
Oh, wait.
I don't care about those signs.
Okay, cool, because I ate them.
You know, not my table.
This one's fine.
You can see, like, this is not trivial. How are we going to know what it is that we can, how is it that we can know what we know? A lot of times we think we know something. It turns out maybe we don't really know as much as we think we do. Think it what? It's a leap of faith. Okay. So this is not trivial. Figuring out what it is we know. When we think about market research, which we'll talk about next time, it really becomes, when we ask people questions, we think we know what we're asking, and a lot of times, maybe we don't. And I'll give you an example from an area that I study. My interest in research, so there are 3 components to being a college professor. You're evaluated on 3 things. You're evaluated on teaching, you're evaluated on research that you do, and you're evaluated on service to the institution. And so my stream of research focuses on things like political marketing. That's what I really, really like. So my stream of research focuses on two areas, ethics and marketing and political marketing, and I think they're intimately intertwined. And so one of the things that we find when we ask people, for example, about the way they feel about certain things in the political marketplace is that they use the same terms, but they may attach radically different meaning to them. So one of the things that I've focused on, or that I've studied in the past, is what does it mean to say family values? Republicans for a long time ran on a platform of family values. And Democrats would say in the political marketplace, we have family values too. But the ideas that they attach to those terms are radically different. And so you have to understand that. What does a Republican mean when they say family values? What are they talking about? What is the Republican Party talking about when they say family values? What? Okay, yeah, in the strictest sense, a lot of them would say that. That it's about, it's about procreation, about, following the biblical command to go forth and populate the earth. And so I think a lot of them would say that that's not what they mean. But they do mean, a mother and a father and 2.75 children and 3 cats in the yard and a white picket fence. And Democrats say we have family values. We like family too. But what is the Democratic idea of family values? Well, it's not the nuclear family. When the Democrats talk about, so they talk past each other because they're attaching different meanings. When the Democrats talk about family values, what are they talking about?
Like all types of family situations?
Yeah, all different types of family situations. Family is not necessarily, for the Democrat, defined by a mother and a father in your bloodline. It can be defined by aunts and uncles and the extended family. And maybe other significant others in your life that may not be related to you by what lawyers call blood or affinity. So you understand what blood is, what's affinity?
The legal guardian?
By marriage, yeah. By that thin gold band on the left hand, right? So when Democrats talk about family, it could be not just your husband and wife and 2.75 children. It can be grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles and other people that are significant in your development. Your friends can be family for the Democrats. So they attach these words. And this happens a lot. When we say things that we think we know all the time, it turns out that it may be more difficult. When I was in the corporate world, one of the things that I did was I sold learning management systems that were compatible across all platforms. What is a platform? What's the ordinary sense of the word platform? If I say it's a platform, what do you think? What do you think? You think something that you stand, like a stage is a platform for a performance, right? That's what you think about. When computer scientists say our product is compatible across all platforms, what do they mean? It's an operating system, right? A platform is, it can be used on Linux, it can be used on Windows, it can be used on an iOS or an Android, things like that. That's what they mean by platform. And so you really have to think about what it is that we're saying and how we can know that what we're communicating to other people is what we're actually trying to communicate. So it's not trivial. It seems trivial, but it's really not. So epistemology, metaphysics. Then the second great question is the question of conduct, which we call moral philosophy. And the third question is governance. Now, conduct, of course, comes into play because we have to have ethics in business. If we don't, we have lots of problems. And governance is important because one of the things that we'll talk about is we will talk about environmental scanning. And part of that environmental scan is understanding the regulatory environment in which your business will operate, or in which you will operate as an individual. And so all three of these questions are important to the study of marketing. So that's why we should study philosophy in marketing, because it helps us clarify these things and think deeply about them and come up with really good answers. Now, you don't have to answer these 3 questions with philosophy. There are 2 other ways that you can answer these questions. And one of the big debates is, what is philosophy and did the Greeks invent it? I generally tend to say that yes, the Greeks invented philosophy. What is it? Well, it's the rational application of seeking knowledge to answer these 3 questions. The other way that you can answer these 3 questions is either with a mythology. You know, you can have a set of belief systems and gods and answer it that way, or you can answer it with a theology, or what we would call a valid or legitimate religion. If you use those, you're not going to have a whole lot of philosophy. Philosophy attempts to escape going to the wise man with the book and asking him for the interpretation, and instead seek this knowledge through the rational mind, through what we call the a priori acquisition of knowledge, using the rational mind to discern what it is we can know. So there's some challenges to ethics in philosophy, and you see these used all the time by people to justify their actions. And one of the things that we have to think about is, why is it that we can't rely on these to justify our actions? So the first of these is called subjectivism. Now, 2 of these seem intuitively correct. The third one doesn't seem intuitively correct, but is actually the most difficult to dispense with. Subjectivism is based on a philosophical notion called solipsism. Solipsism says, solipsism says, the self is all one can know. Think about that. The self is all one can know. We tell people all the time, and one of the things that we know about marketing and studies of consumer behavior and consumer satisfaction is that consumers tend to like businesses and do business with people that they feel have empathy. What does it mean to empathize with someone?
To understand the situation.
Yeah, I oftentimes tell students, I have a lot of empathy for you, I have no sympathy for you. I realize that students think that college professors are like Venus born of the phone, that we hatched and just showed up with all this knowledge, but I didn't, as much as I would like to believe that. I sat where you sat for a long time. Right? 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's, a Juris Doctorate, and a PhD. I've sat in your position for a long time. So I have a lot of empathy. But when students say things to me like, I gotta have a C, this happened to me last semester, a student came into my office, I gotta have a C, you have an F. But I gotta have a C. If I don't get a C, I'll lose my student loans. If I lose my student loans, I'm gonna be thrown out of my apartment. I'll be living on the street by Friday, and it'll be all your fault. Right? All my fault. The 35 other Fs that you had nothing to do with this, right? So I have a lot of empathy. Well, I don't know, do I really know what it's like to be in your shoes? When I went to college, and it hasn't been that many years ago, it was relatively cheap. I think my tuition at OU was like $1,500 a semester, you know, for 15 hours. Back in 1980 or 1992. Any of you paid $1,500 for? So do I really have a lot of, do I really understand what it's like? I mean, I didn't, because it was so cheap, my parents could pay, you know, between scholarship and my parents, I didn't have to work. How many of you have to work to be here? And my full-time job was going to school. That was what my parents said, you're gonna go to school. I said I wanted to get a job. Nope, you need to get through school, and then you can worry about a job. Yeah. So do I really know what it's like to be in your shoes?
You have an idea.
I don't. Can you ever really imagine being someone other than who you are? You really can't. You can't really know what it's like to be somebody else. And so subjectivists relying upon solipsism say, look, we can never really know what it's like to be somebody else. Therefore, ethics is all up to me. I have to make up my mind for myself what's ethical and what's not. And what I believe may be radically different than what you believe. Now, this seems to be not only intuitively attractive, but it also seems to be borne out by the anthropological, archaeological, and sociological record. If I ask you about really hard questions, should we, for example, in marketing, one of the things that we're going to have a big debate on in this country is, should we allow for the marketing, the legalized marketing of marijuana? When I started teaching here 25 years ago, I never thought we would see the legalization of marijuana. And we haven't yet in Oklahoma. But they've seen it where? Colorado. And Oklahoma what? What? Oklahoma borders on Colorado. A very narrow part of Oklahoma, right at the panhandle, touches Colorado. So that's a state that we border on, that's legalized marijuana. I never thought we would have gotten to that point. But, should we legalize this? We could have one, and we'd have, like, if I asked this class with 65 of you in here, I bet we would have 65 different opinions on the subject. Everything from, well, let's go full bore and legalize not only marijuana, but what? Well, yeah, let's legalize everything. Let's just, Nelly, don't bar the door. Let's legalize everything to, there would be the other extreme, which would say what? No legalization of anything. And then there would be a lot of people in the middle that would say things like, well, maybe we should legalize medical marijuana. We have an opioid crisis, and maybe marijuana would be better. I mean, so we would have all these, so solipsism seems, and subjectivism seems true, because it seems like we can never really know, and we have lots of different opinions. So there comes this question of whether or not there are proofs in ethics, and a lot of people would say, well, this is an example of the fact that there aren't proofs in ethics. But I think that you can argue that there are proofs in ethics, and there are things that we can all agree upon that you don't want to have happen to you, right? You all want to live for the most part. I told you I have a concealed carry permit. I am highly offended by people who fall asleep in my class because I am entertaining. So if you fall asleep in my class, I take out my .357 Magnum, and justice is fast. We'll only have one person that falls asleep, trust me. There will only be one of you. It will never happen again, right? Well, no. I mean, you can know a priori not to do this. You want to live, and so you shouldn't take somebody else's life indiscriminately. You don't have to experience death to know that you don't want to die. You can know this a priori. You can know it without reference to experience, which would be a posteriori knowledge, which is knowledge that's gained not from the rational mind, but from experience. The second one is used a lot by businesses, especially in international relations, to justify their actions, and it's called cultural relativism. Cultural relativism says, well, now look, we can't form a society if we allow everybody to run around and decide for themselves what is or is not moral. That's not going to work. This is, if we did that, we would have what Hobbes posits in Leviathan as the state of nature. This war of all against all. We could never have businesses, we could never market anything because nobody would trust anybody else. So it's not that we base ethics and morality in the individual, but we base it in the culture. It's based on the society. It's societally based. Now again, this seems intuitively appealing, and it's appealing in business because we see all kinds of different relationships in business and all different kinds of systems that you're going to have to deal with. And you are going to be involved in international business, if for no other reason than you are going to be consumers of goods that flow in international trade. That shirt you're wearing was not made in America. The cotton may have been made in America, but I can guarantee it was shipped to where? Singapore, China, Taiwan, someplace like that to be manufactured, and Mexico, and then brought back into the United States. And so you're going to be involved in international business one way or another. Is it ethical? Are those clothes that you're, like a lot of them are made in sweatshops where the workers are almost engaged in slave labor?
Cultural downside.
Yes.
We had something like covering that, or we talked about something like that. Whenever I lived in Germany, there was this big, this thing that happened where the people at Primark, like you'd buy clothes and you would see like sewn into like your tags, like send help, like SOS, like we are, I don't know, like I guess the people that were making the clothes, like the conditions were so bad, like they were
Yeah, I mean,
by sewing it into like clothing.
and guess what? It happens not just in those countries. It actually happens in places like the United States as well, where people, they've gone into factories in some instances and found people that were basically living in slave-like conditions, and that their employers were telling them, you know, if you say anything, we'll just have you deported, and we'll call in, you know, I mean, we can replace you. So cultures vary widely, and businesses say we should be able to do business. I had a client years ago call me, and they asked me, I was serving as their external legal advisor on a number of issues and a number of contracts, and they wanted to hire an international buyer. And they asked me if they could not hire the most qualified person. So the qualifications for this international buyer were they were going to be posted in China, and so you had to have fluency in Chinese. You had to be fluent in Chinese. There are various dialects in Chinese, by the way. Just like, you know, U.S. English is not what you're going to hear where? In Great Britain. They don't think we speak the Queen's English in Great Britain. And maybe we don't. Now, we can generally understand them. But so you had to be fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and you had to have a master's degree, and you had to have at least 4 years experience in international purchasing. There are not very many of these people out there. And the most qualified candidate was actually a foreign-born, now naturalized citizen of the United States, a Chinese female, and they didn't want to hire her. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because they won't treat women the same in business negotiations in China as they will treat men. And so we will be at a competitive disadvantage. So can we get out of the EEOC requirement? So when you go to apply for a job in the United States, because we have this thing called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, it says that we will not discriminate, with certain limited exceptions, right? Nobody's going to say, for example, that you have to hire a Jew to be the Baptist minister because they apply at the First Southern Baptist Church in Guthrie, right? I mean, that's an exception to the rule, and that's what we call a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification. So they asked me if they could get away with using this bona fide occupational qualification to not hire this woman. And I said, no, you can't. That's not a BFOQ. Can she perform the essential functions of the job? And they said, yeah. And I said, then you can't use that as a BFOQ. The fact that somebody else doesn't want to do business or won't respect them to the same level, that's not a legitimate reason to discriminate. So you can't discriminate in the United States. You can discriminate for any reason except the wrong reason in hiring. What does that mean? You can't discriminate on the basis of what? Race, creed, color, religion, what else? National origin. Those are the ones that you can't. Those are what we call suspect classes. And then there are quasi-suspect classes that you may be able to discriminate if you have a bona fide occupational qualification. What's a bona fide qualification? Bona fide occupational qualification. If you want to be a prison guard, for example, in a male correctional facility in the state of Oklahoma, you have to be able to drag a dummy across a gym floor, a 175-pound dummy across a gym floor, a basketball court. Now, who does that discriminate against? So this is what we call a disparate impact, as opposed to an out. So you don't say you can't be female and apply for jobs in the male correctional facilities. You don't say that, but it has a disparate impact. It's a facially neutral regulatory requirement that has a disparate impact on who? It has a disparate impact on women. Why? Yeah, they're generally not able to, there's fewer of them that are able to drag a 175-pound dead weight the length of a gym floor. Is that a legitimate BFOQ? Yes, it is, because, in fact, you might have to do what as a prison guard? Yeah, you might have to drag a prisoner across, back to their cell, or to solitary confinement or something like that. So that's a legitimate thing. But this idea that they just don't want to deal with you, that's not a legitimate. It's not an essential function of the job, and so you can't get away with this in terms of being a BFOQ. But lots of business people try to justify this by saying, look, we need to do this. Bribery, for example, in certain countries is expected. If you want to get contracts in those countries, a lot of American businesses say we need to be able to engage in bribery. And because we have this law in the United States called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, you can't do that. And a lot of American businesses say this hurts us. Well, the third one, these two seem true. This third one doesn't seem true. Psychological egoism says that people always behave selfishly. They will always behave in such a way as to promote their own self-interest. We are inherently selfish. And we cannot help but respond the way we respond to things. Now this one doesn't seem true because we see lots of examples of people acting not selfishly, right? Name one. An example of someone who's very famous that didn't seem to be at all selfish. Mother Teresa. Yeah. The late, great Mother Teresa, who has now been canonized by the Holy See, and she is now saint. She's now a saint, right? A psychological egoist would say she's still behaving selfishly because she's doing what she wanted to do. Maybe because of the good feelings that flowed from what she did. Or maybe because she believes that she shouldn't disobey God and God told her to do this, but she's still doing what she wanted to do. She was still behaving inherently selfishly. Now, this doesn't seem true, but think about this. So psychological egoists, let's say you have the ability, let's say you see something that you want. What is it that you all really like, that you like in terms of stuff that you like to buy? This is one of the things that makes marketing really, really fun is we can talk about stuff that you all really are interested in. What are you all really, really interested in? Technology. What kind of technology? Cell phone. You're really interested in cell phones. You just love cell phones. What kind of cell phone do you have?
Well, I have an iPhone.
You have an
I
iPhone.
have,
You have what?
I have 3 other cell phones.
You have 3 other cell phones. Why do you have 3 cell phones? I can't keep up with one cell phone.
Either past cell phones or like there's one that was a Nokia N900. It wasn't meant to be a cell phone, but I took it apart, rebuilt it, and made it a cell phone.
So you like just figuring stuff out, and you created your own cell phone out of this piece of tech. So I take it that was probably like a PDA? Is that what it was?
Kind of, yeah. It was like early 2007, 2000.
Okay, you made it into a cell phone. You made it into a smartphone. Functions as a cell phone. You made it into a smartphone, basically. That's what you did. So you like, so why do you have the iPhone? Which version of the iPhone do you have?
6S.
You have the 6S. I have the 7.
I've always stayed one behind.
Because my 6 got cracked, and I never ever bought insurance on these things because I always thought insurance was for suckers until like I washed my cell phone, and after that it was like buy insurance, and I'm like I go through the list of things, and as a lawyer I read the contract to make sure it covers like theft. If I just decide to chuck it out the window one day and break it because I'm angry at it, I make sure it covers everything that might happen to me because I become enormously frustrated with these devices. I'm not a technologically sophisticated person. I can figure out how to make it communicate with my camera. But so you got a cell phone. You're in love with the cell phone. You look at it like Gollum and eyelashes, right?
Well, I mean, think about it. It's literally what not even 10 years ago would have been the fastest computer ever, and now it's
Absolutely. There is more computing power in this device than existed in the world in 1950. More computing power in this device. And this is not a supercomputer, right?
More. Go back 20 years.
Right, yeah, I mean, yeah, you go back 20 years, and that's, my first undergraduate degree, I remember going, I started out as a classical letters major, and I switched to political science. And the reason that I switched was because I wanted to go to law school, and it required the least amount of math. Like all you had to have to be a political scientist was there's this math class. So in those days, there were 2 sides of the degree sheet. There was the left-hand side and the right-hand side. You all now have the top and the bottom half of the degree sheet. And on the left-hand side, all it said was like math for idiots. That's all I had to have. And math scares me, right? Like scared. So I didn't pay attention to this course called they lied. They hid it. You had to have 2 courses on the right-hand side of the degree sheet that were called information management. One of them was called information management and political science. And I thought, I know how to manage information. You take good notes. You write it down. That's managing. It was Stats 1. The second one was called Public Policy Analysis and Political Science. Again, I thought, I know how to do that. You look at the agenda for the city council meeting, you see that they're going to raise the speed limit, and you sort of figure out, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Easy, breezy, beautiful, right? That was Stats 2. It had nothing to do, I got tricked into having to take these math courses. And then when I did my master's degree, I really had to have a lot of stats. And then when I went to the doctorate, I had to have 23 hours of statistics. It's crazy. Crazy amounts of math. I have no idea how I got through the stats series in marketing. I just don't know, right? So, you like this device, because if we went back in time, I can do all kinds of mathematical equations now and figure stuff out on this phone that you couldn't even do. We have come up with models in marketing now as a result of the computer power that's available on this device that you couldn't have, the models, we have this whole thing in marketing now, and another social sciences called SEM, structural equational models. And what structural equational models do is they try to map nonlinear relationships, but they fundamentally rely on an underlying series of regressions, which are linear relationships. You couldn't do the math that's required to do a SEM model 10 years ago, even. The computing power just wasn't there to do it. You're talking about looking at something like the SEM model that I had to do for my doctoral coursework relied on 160 latent variables, modeling 160 latent variables on their impact on 2 dependent variables. You couldn't do the math without this kind of computing. So you're fascinated by this. Can you will yourself to not want that cell phone? No, you can't. I mean, it's really you can't now you might not. You don't have the 7. You said you had a 6S. Why don't you have the 7?
Simply because Apple's built to last. I mean, PCs I feel you have to replace, on a 5-yearly basis. Whereas I have a 2001 iPhone 4 that still functions. It actually runs my OEM set.
Okay.
It's an old Apple computer, but it's built to last.
But you still want the 7. No. Well,
I do want Galaxy.
you want the Galaxy 8. We don't have the Galaxy 8. Isn't that an example of free will? The fact that you have the 6S and not the Galaxy 8 is a product of free will? A lot of people would say, yeah, that's a product of free will. A psychological egoist would say, no, it's not. Because you simply want something more than you want the Galaxy 8. And what is it that you want more than the Galaxy 8? You want money, that's exactly it. You want the money, but you didn't will yourself to want that either, right? You didn't will you may want something else more, but it's simply, you didn't will yourself to want or not want that. We'll finish this up next time and we'll move into the marketing ethics, and I'll show you, or marketing research, I'll show you a thing that is an application of this in marketing research on ethics, a video by Alessandro Giusti.